Hi, my name is David Barnett from the law offices of Barnett, Lerner, and Karsen, PA. I've been asked to talk to you briefly today about psychiatric injuries under the Defense-Based Act and the Longshore and Harborworkers Compensation Act. It's important to note that if you get hurt at work, the law covers both physical injuries as well as psychiatric injuries. With what's transpired in the last 8-9 years in Iraq and Afghanistan, we've seen a large number of individuals that have sustained psychological injuries because they've experienced the horrors of war. The law covers and provides benefits for an individual who has such a psychiatric or psychological response, including depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and a number of conditions that just arise from their exposure to traumatic events that they've experienced while working in a war zone. Under the law provides entitlement to benefits with a condition arising from any stressful situation. In actuality, the law says stress, no matter how slight, if a claimant perceives a condition which brings on a disabling psychiatric condition, they're entitled to benefits under the Defense-Based Act and the Longshore and Harborworkers Compensation Act. It's important to note that in pursuing these claims, it's not the diagnosis that matters. We've heard all too often in the last few years people concerned about whether they have post-traumatic stress disorder. That's really not the issue. The issue is whether or not an individual has sustained a disabling psychiatric injury. The diagnosis is not that important. What's important is whether or not they have a psychological condition which needs medical care, as well as whether or not that psychological condition impacts their ability to engage in their normal customary work, which could include returning back to work in a war zone such as Iraq and Afghanistan.
One of the issues that's become more prominent recently is the issue of traumatic brain injury. In many instances, psychiatric or psychological injuries have been misdiagnosed when there was an actual physical organic injury. In many cases that we're seeing, an individual exposed to an explosive event close to a concussive blast can actually suffer physical brain damage. In many cases, the symptoms can mirror those of psychiatric or psychological injuries. The medical literature, the medical research is still very early on the issue of traumatic brain injury, and as such, the doctors have a very difficult time distinguishing between what is a true physical traumatic brain injury and psychological or psychiatric injuries. One of the issues that becomes very important is for the doctors treating the injured worker to have a very clear and concise understanding of the conditions and the events to which they were exposed. So if there is a specific event, a concussive blast, an IED, or a mortar explosion, that those are explained to the doctor so that they can take that into account in diagnosing the true nature of the injury. In all too many cases, a psychological or psychiatric injury is diagnosed without regard for any actual physical trauma that the individual may have experienced, and particularly in regard to any physical trauma they may have experienced related to a brain injury.
For more information regarding psychological claims and traumatic brain injury, feel free to contact our offices, Barnett and Lerner, PA, www.injuredoverseas.com.